Near East Relief to Near East Foundation actually began in 1925. And it was based on a 3-year, 8-country comprehensive needs assessment in the Middle East. The idea was that the crisis that Near East Relief had been created for was beginning to abate, but that a lot had been learned about what it meant to build sustainable, inclusive, just societies. The initial work focused on improving standards of living through agricultural development, vocational training, education, healthcare, but more importantly, in the long term, was building the capacity of local people and local institutions to sustain positive change. It also focused on improving relationships between what were then called races, and there were a number of interracial programs as well. The earliest work of Near East Foundation, as we became known in 1930, focused on those communities in which the orphans settled, helping them to become established, helping them to integrate into their communities, and helping them, as Shant said, become productive members of their communities and their societies. Since then, Near East Foundation has worked in more than 40 countries, as far away as from Armenia as Korea, Madagascar, Lesotho, Swaziland. The work that we call international development seems commonplace today. There are a lot of organizations who do international development work, humanitarian assistance, but this was the first time that any work was undertaken of this kind. And its impact on international philanthropy and foreign policy was profound. This is a photograph from Lebanon. The Institute for Rural Life, which the Near East Foundation established in 1930 with the American University of Beirut, was a driver for agricultural modernization throughout the Levant. It continues to function today as the American University of Beirut's Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences, 85 years later. Our work in Greece and rural reconstruction, again, these are in communities that Near East Relief had engaged through its work with the orphans and refugees, served as a model for the Marshall Plan. And Near East Foundation was indeed an implementer of the Marshall Plan in Greece, in Macedonia. Our work in Iran, which began in 1946, was cited by President Truman as a model when he created the Point 4 program, which eventually became the U.S. Agency for International Development, one of our major vehicles for delivering foreign assistance in developing countries. Our work in Iran inspired the designers of the Peace Corps, and one of the 3 drafters of the white paper that created the Peace Corps was a Near East Foundation worker in Iran in the 1950s. Today, we continue to respond to people at their time of greatest need, just as we did in 1915. The need, again, is great. The Syrian refugee crisis and civil war is the humanitarian crisis of our day. And just as NEF focused its efforts on self-sufficiency, resilience through politically neutral work in its early days, and for its nearly 100-year history, it continues to maintain a focus on self-sufficiency, resilience, and autonomy today, based on the theory that marginalized, disadvantaged populations around the world need a meaningful way of making a living, a seat at the table at which decisions are made that affect their well-being, and the knowledge to sustain their participation in civic and economic life of their communities. We call this knowledge, voice, and enterprise, and it underpins all of our work today. So what I'd like to do is just share a few examples of the type of work that we're doing today. This is a photograph from the West Bank, the Palestinian territories, where we have a program that's building cross-border economic cooperation and development between Israelis and Palestinians. We bring olive farmers, millers, bottlers, and distributors together introduce new technologies and practices to strengthen the olive sector, and a sector that involves 100,000 Palestinian families, to improve income, to build mutual understanding, cooperation, and trust between these two groups of people, Palestinians and Israelis, Jews, Muslims. What we're trying to do is to create an economic foundation and a foundation for economic relations and economic incentives to continue to deepen and sustain relationships. We're working in 60 communities. Over the past 3 years, we've had 1,500 people participate in cross-border economic collaboration. This is, as you hear, all of the negative news that's coming from this part of the world. In 2013, building on our grassroots efforts, we helped broker an agreement, a trade agreement, that opened the border between the West Bank and Israel to olive oil trade for the first time in 12 years. In that first year, 3,600 tons of olive oil crossed the border with a value of $20 million to Palestinian farmers. These are villagers, simple smallholder farmers. And our work in the area covers about $50 million worth of economic activity every year. So economics are good for a project that spends $400,000 a year. We wanted to look at what the impact was on attitudes towards the other side. So we did a survey of 200 project participants at the end of 2013. We found that 94% reported positive interactions, 90% reported increased trust, and 94% thought that cooperation and norms of trust could be generalized throughout their communities. Thank you. I'd like to say also that is an initiative of our Palestinian staff. So in Darfur, we are working to build peace and reduce poverty, which are interlinked problems, through collaborative natural resource management. We bring together diverse groups of people. We're working with 25 important major villages across central Darfur, help them develop tools for sharing resources, for managing conflicts constructively, and investing in improved productivity and profitability of their natural resources, grasslands, waterways, forests, and fields. This is a photograph of a couple of villagers reseeding a shared pasture area. Livestock is a very important part of the economy in Darfur. It's also a trigger of conflict that escalates, and we've seen some of the consequences of that. In the upper corner is the same field after this enrichment planting, they call it. So this work has affected the lives of tens of thousands of people, and what we found, if you overlay a conflict map, this is happened, we did in 2014, a map of conflicts in these communities with a map of the areas where we're working, which were chosen because they were areas where there had been conflict. There was no overlap. We are also helping to, working with smallholder farmers in Darfur, particularly those who are returning to their villages after these genocidal acts, helping them recover from conflict, restarting agriculture, rebuilding markets, restarting agricultural marketplaces. This young woman in yellow is a seed vendor at one of the seed fairs that we've organized. So what we're trying to do is to help people who are returning access certified seeds so they can produce crops, reestablish their agriculture, rebuild their livelihoods, and also inject cash into the economy. Smallholder farmers is a kind of a cornerstone of our work. It's one of our key program areas. Family farms are facing challenges from increasing scarcity of water due to climate change, their changing climate. We help smallholder farmers adopt new agricultural practices that improve their income and reduce their consumption of water. This is a couple of photographs from our work in Morocco, where we recently completed a project working with 5,000 farm families, helping them through this process increase their income, their household income by 25%, and reduce their water consumption at the same time between 50 and 60%. There's simple technologies. In some cases, this is an underground traditional channel, and it hadn't flowed for 7 years before this intervention. So we worked with the community to help them organize and reactivate this water source so that they could grow crops, earn money. This is just down the road. We're not only working with traditional technologies, in this case, a solar-powered pumping system for vegetable production. This is a photograph from our work in Mali. We've been in northern Mali for 30 years. It's been reeling now because of drought, a coup, occupation by jihadists. This is a very simple technology for harvesting rainwater. It increases productivity over traditional practices by 400%. The Syrian refugee crisis and civil war, one of the great humanitarian crises of our day. 3 million people have fled across borders, 1.1 million in Lebanon, now representing 25% of the population there, 600,000 refugees in Jordan. Not only are the refugees facing hardships, but the communities in which they settle are experiencing elevated poverty rates and unemployment. So we've been working in Jordan and now in Lebanon, starting last week, in fact, working with refugees. I should say during this time, with this mass outflow of refugees, there's also been a decrease in humanitarian aid going to them. So what we've been doing, drawing on this experience in self-sufficiency, microenterprise, small business development, been working with both refugees and their host communities to help women in particular. There are many women-headed households among the refugees start small businesses. Last year, in a pilot phase, this is the first time that the Jordanian government had ever allowed this to happen, we assisted 830 refugee families start small businesses with grants averaging $300, increased their income over the past year by almost 50%. What we're trying to do, just as in our early days, is help build self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and resilience, reduce the dependence on humanitarian assistance. Our target for this year is to work with another 2,500 families to help them start businesses in these two countries, Lebanon and Jordan. We did return to Armenia in 2004. Shant actually visited and designed our early work there upon our return, focusing on rural entrepreneurship. Armenia has a weak economy. Unemployment of youth is around 50%. In rural areas, there are very few opportunities to earn a living. To address this problem, we launched an initiative to help create jobs, improve rural livelihoods by focusing on a number of traditional industries. This is and we do this through small business development, business training, and providing startup loans, for small-scale startup loans, and microcredit, building access to microcredit. This is an example of a fruit dryer who we worked with in the very north of the country. It was now exporting dried peaches to Europe in cooperation with a confectionery. Producing trout around Gavar. This person, I think Shant visited this person when he was just starting out with one fish pond. He has 5 fish ponds now and earns about $25,000 a year in profit, which is a significant amount. This is emblematic of what we're trying to do to build income, self-sufficiency, resilience in rural Armenia. We also launched a network of rural computer centers. This is, in many cases, the first time that people in Armenian villages, young people, have had access to the outside world through the internet. We use what we call a micro-franchise model, which has a shared business plan. It makes it easier for aspiring entrepreneurs to start and maintain their businesses. We started with a network of 20, and the success rate has been 80% so far. They operate as a club, sharing experience. There's a helpline, and we see this as helping to ensure the success of these businesses. And recently, based on this, this experience, we have started, pictures are a little bizarre, but we don't actually take pictures of the people we work with in this most recent initiative in Armenia, working with survivors of domestic violence, which is a problem that affects, by some accounts, 1 in 4 Armenian women. There's growing awareness through advocacy. There's a number of women's shelters that have appeared. We are working with a women's shelter that is supported by the Tufenkian Foundation. And there are attempts to introduce legislation. What we found when we started this dialogue was that there were shelters, but without exception, the women who sought shelter there would end up back in their abusive environments. They had no choice. They had no economic independence. They had no alternative other than to return to their home. So we started a pilot, and again, there was resistance to this model at first, social resistance, but also a reticence by the women themselves who were at these shelters to think that they could, in fact, become independent and therefore have a choice. Whether they return to their homes or not return to their homes, they had a choice. So we used a similar model to our rural entrepreneurship program, providing training in business development, helping women develop business plans, providing them with small startup grants, giving them access to microcredit in some cases. Our first year, we helped 25 women start small businesses. They're all operating today. The average income is $700 a month, which is pretty significant in the Armenian context. And we just secured a grant from the European Union to expand this to 250 women in 4 regions across the country, working with a range of local organizations to help build this capacity to address this need. When the model is introduced, we will move on and continue to mentor, but not provide the services ourselves. Finally, this is the face of the Near East Foundation today. We operate programs in Armenia, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Mali, Morocco, Palestinian territories, Senegal, and Sudan. All of our staff are local. We employ 140 people overseas. All of them are from the countries in which they serve, working to build more prosperous, inclusive, sustainable communities in their own countries. It's a point of great pride for the organization that we operate in this way. Some of our employees in these pictures have been with us for 20 years. They have a great commitment to this cause. If I had two things that I think of as take-home from the story of Near East Foundation, one of them was that America's response to the Armenian Genocide is about more than the Armenian Genocide. It shaped our humanitarian impulse as a nation. It is part of our story. The idea that average people could make a difference in faraway places started in 1915. And is part of who we are as a nation today. It started with our response to the Armenian Genocide. Second, that in spite of the complicated politics and violence that make headlines in the news today, there's a lot of reason to be hopeful at a local level. Modest investments can have a transformative impact on individuals, on families, on communities, and ultimately on nations. In the tumult and tragedy, there is also great opportunity for positive change and for people like us to have a positive and lasting impact. That is as true today as it was in 1915.